Jim Himes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I particularly appreciate your highlighting the urgency of this House acting to support the Ukrainians. Much is in the balance, so thank you for doing that. I do want to turn my attention to the topic I previewed, election interference, but since the chairman brought it up, I want to just spend a minute or two on the southern border. And let me state up front that every country needs a secure border, but I also think it's important that we put into context in a hearing called Worldwide Threats what the threats are from the southern border relative to North Korea, pandemics, Russia, China, cyber attacks, you name it. Director Wray, I guess I'll start with you. Give me a time period, choose a time period, 5, 10 years. Over a 5 or 10 year period, what percentage of domestic terrorist attacks in this country were undertaken by undocumented aliens or groups of undocumented?
Of domestic, you mean in other words, attacks here?
Domestic terrorist events.
You mean attacks here in the United States?
Exactly.
Right. I don't have a percentage. A large number of them have been conducted by what we call HVEs, homegrown violent extremists, who are inspired by ISIS.
What's the number one category of those who perpetrate domestic terrorist events? Number one category.
Well, again, the number one category of terrorist attacks here are lone actors in small cells or small groups with using readily accessible weapons against
I'm asking, what I'm trying to get at here, lone actors, are they undocumented? What percentage of domestic terrorist attacks are undertaken by the undocumented?
I don't have a percentage.
Is it 50%?
No.
Is it 25%?
I would be surprised.
You'd be surprised, okay. What percentage of the fentanyl that enters this country comes on the backs, if you will, of the undocumented relative to that percentage which comes in through legitimate ports of entry?
Again, I don't have the percentage, but I would tell you that the vast majority of the fentanyl in this country obviously comes from Mexico, the other side of the border.
Right, but it is my understanding, and contradict me if I'm wrong, that the vast majority comes through legal ports of entry. Is that your understanding as well?
I have been told that.
Okay. Would it surprise you to know that encounters on the southern border in the third year of this president's presidency, in the third year, 23, were about 80. Do you know what the encounters with known or suspected terrorists in the third year of the previous president? Do you know what that number is? It's a CBP number.
No, I don't have those numbers.
Okay.
I know that the numbers over the last 5 years is what is the information I have. Over the last 5 years, the number of encounters.
Right, well, I'm making a comparison here, and the answer to that question is that in the third year of the Biden presidency, encounters on the southern border with known or suspected terrorists is 80. In the third year of the previous administration, the equivalent number is 280. I'm sorry that we have to talk about this. It's a serious issue. I would just put it into the context of the many, many threats that we have. I'm sorry that we need to talk about this because the chairman and I were with the president in the cabinet room when then Leader McConnell said to the speaker, you will not get a better border deal if Donald Trump is president, if the Republicans control the Senate, and if they call the House. What a lost opportunity to address the problems that my Republican friends make such hay over. With that, I want to turn to what I really am concerned about, which is, in particular, foreign interference in our election. The unclassified threat assessment before us today is the latest in a string of IC analysis going back years, documenting foreign ambitions to influence our elections. I'm pleased that the community's assessment leans forward to describe these threats in such plain terms, because our best defense is ensuring that the Americans across the political spectrum are informed and aware of the range of adversaries and what they may do. So I want to use the remainder of my time until the chairman gavels me down around 3 questions. What does the threat look like? And by the way, just to prompt that discussion, I have reproduced what the New York Times reported on last week, which was they were a little hazy about precisely who, but they attributed it to the Russians setting up 4 completely fake newspapers online. The DC Weekly, the interestingly named New York News Daily, that's not the Daily News, that's the News Daily, the Chicago Chronicle, and the Miami Chronicle. And the New York Times reported, these websites have since been taken down, that they mix local news with actual Kremlin propaganda. So I'm just putting that out there to prompt what I'm getting at here is how can Americans identify what foreign interference may look like? Specifics. We've read that Russians may seek to start faux grassroots demonstrations. So again, I have 3 categories of questions. That's one. Number 2, and this is really important, what are you doing about it? And Director Wray, I'm going to close with you because every American has a right to know that what you're doing about this is also consistent with their protections of expression under the First Amendment. So let me devote some time now to part 1. What exactly should Americans expect to see if there are attempts to interfere with our elections, beyond what I've posted back here?
Thank you. I can start, sir. I think, so thanks for obviously raising this issue because it's of absolutely critical importance to us. And as you noted, we have our intelligence community assessment on this that's been unclassified and released on our website on these issues. I think as we look back at the 2020 US election cycle, Russia engaged in a multi-pronged effort intended to really heighten broad existing US socio-political tensions and sow distrust in democratic processes. And Russia's online influence actors really sought to amplify mistrust in the electoral process by denigrating mail-in ballots, highlighting alleged irregularities, accusing the Democratic Party of voter fraud. Russia continued its efforts during the 2022 election cycle, probably with the intent to distract and weaken the United States and reduce US support to Ukraine, targeting specific demographics with tailored messaging intending to elicit responses about strongly held beliefs or moral issues. And what we do about it, and obviously, the point of saying that they have a multi-pronged attack is that you may see things along the lines of what you've described in the New York Times, but they also use, for example, commercial firms, others that are sort of go-betweens. They have a whole series of different ways of approaching effectively their information operations in this space. And what we do in the intelligence community is we've stood up an election security, basically, group. They have different leads from different elements that participate. And these IC elements are working collectively, effectively, to identify this type of information operations. And what we do is we provide it largely to the Department of Homeland Security and to the FBI for them to act and to interact.
Director, let me stop you there because I really want to focus
Please.
on what it looks like. Something you said caught my attention. Accusations that the system is corrupt, that elections are rigged, which are a hallmark, obviously, of the previous president's speeches, and, to be fair, most recently raised by a California Senate candidate on the Democratic side, those statements that the systems are rigged may be designed to cause Americans to lose confidence in their electoral system. Is that fair of me to emphasize?
Yes, they have for years, the Russians have for years in their information operations been trying to basically discredit the legitimacy of our processes and ultimately our democratic system. That is one of their main objectives in information operations.
Are any of you aware, let's just get it on the record, in the last 7 years of any material evidence that American elections are rigged? Can I get an audible no? Thank you. Okay, no evidence that in the last 7 years any American elections have in any material way been rigged. Okay, thank you. Director Haynes, before we move on, because I do want you to talk about what you're doing about it, but what else? We've got fake news sites. I hate to use the term, but those are fake news sites. We've got accusations that the systems is rigged, that the American government is being weaponized against Americans. What else?
Sure. There's also efforts to go after particular policy positions, to stoke divisions in society, in effect, and
how do you stoke divisions amongst Americans?
So you effectively take where there's real content, where there's disputes within American society, socioeconomic issues or otherwise, and then you effectively lift and highlight those divisions up. It's one of the more challenging things for us to identify what the impact is because largely it's an exacerbation of an existing division in effect, and it's one of the areas where they seek to focus.
So let's spend a minute or so on what you're doing about it. You were starting to say that you talked to DHS, and Director Wray, we're going to close because I think these efforts that you make against these attempts at misinformation and division are critical, but there is a very hazy line between identifying those efforts, going after those efforts, and compromising constitutionally protected freedom of expression and speech. So, Director Haynes, give us a sense for what you're doing about it.
Sure, and I'd welcome it to the extent that you have time just to hear from some of my other colleagues. I mean, I think all of us are involved in this in many respects in supporting ultimately DHS and FBI's efforts on these questions. We stood up in ODNI the Election Threat Executive in 2019, which was incorporated into the Foreign Malign Influence Center. And that center is responsible for integrating intelligence on foreign malign influence or interference targeting U.S. elections. It also strategically manages IC collection and analytic resources on this issue and fosters partnership with other government, private, and foreign entities. And in 2022, we added the position of a National Intelligence Officer for foreign malign influence and the National Intelligence Council for leading analysis across the IC on foreign influence for U.S. elections. And it's also, like, as we work with different groups, and as I mentioned, DHS and FBI, I'll let obviously Director Wray talk about FBI's Foreign Influence Task Force and their work on this, but DHS has an Office of Intelligence and Analysis, and they provide analytic and collection support regarding threats to U.S. election infrastructure, as well as U.S. organizations, campaigns, public officials, and they work closely with DHS's Cyber Security and Infrastructure Agency, CISA, as people know it, which is charged with assisting election officials and their private sector partners to mitigate risk and enhance the physical security and resilience of election facilities and equipment. And maybe just turn it then to...
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
These efforts are critical. Director Wray, it is essential that Americans have confidence that these issues are identified without the FBI or anybody else stepping on their constitutional rights. So give us 90 seconds of why we should be confident that you can do that.
So our focus is not on the content. Our focus is on the actor, the foreign actor, and that's a key distinction. We're not the arbiter. We don't seek to be the arbiter of what's truth or fake. What we are doing is trying to identify the hidden hand of foreign adversaries, foreign intelligence services, fake accounts that in fact belong to some foreign adversary, and alerting the right people to that. That's the primary category in this foreign malign influence space. There is a second category that is important in an election year, which is lies about where and when to vote, for example, is a form of voter suppression, and that can be a crime, and there's a criminal investigation that would ensue there, and we alert the appropriate election officials so that they can make sure people know where they actually can vote and what the times the polls are open and that kind of thing, but that's a separate category.
Thank you. Well, I appreciate that. I will yield back, but I've been doing this now for almost a decade and have seen, like you, every manner of threat out there. And though I have seen every manner of threat out there and appreciate their severity, I still believe what Lincoln said in 1838 in a speech he gave. Lincoln said, "America will never be destroyed from the outside. If we falter and lose our freedoms, it will be because we destroyed ourselves." Yield back.